Okay, I'm recording now. So Amber, yeah, why don't you go ahead and let us know, like where did you all get to?
We got to almost the end. So our task was essentially for the user to be able to join a list that already exists. So you're supposed to be able to put in a token that like is already tied to the items you've already made, and when you put in that token, it pulls up just that. And I got that functionality down, and I didn't even realize it, unfortunately, until I submitted the PR because I had a console log logging the wrong variable. But when you navigate from the list after it pulls your tokens items, if you go back, local storage is reset somehow. So it doesn't store the token that you put in to join the list. And I'm not even sure how I did that, to be honest. But that's like the last step. But after that, and also to right now you're supposed to be able to click a button to bring up that form to type in that token, and right now it's just displayed on the home page. So I'm also planning to like make a button that conditionally renders that component when you click it. So those two things are what we still need to do.
Okay, so it sounds like you got pretty far, but that sounds like a pretty critical bug to be deleting the token. So that's something we definitely need to take care of. And that other thing should be a relatively minor piece of work to get the form just kind of showing after the user clicks on the button. Okay, cool. And then McKee and Mike, do you want to kind of let us know where you got to?
Yeah, so we managed to, what we had to complete this past week was to throw an error if there is a duplicate in the database. And we managed to throw that error when there's a duplicate, but it's actually looking at the entire database and not the users list.
Oh, right, sure.
So it's just a matter of like, how do we how do we just like, look at the users list instead of the whole entire database? Yeah.
It sounds like wasn't there also a kind of a race condition or something where like sometimes it would, like, it just sounded, I don't know, maybe I was misunderstanding, but it sounded like there was something about kind of asynchronous operations, and sometimes it was finishing before or after.
So we
different approaches.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So we were like both trying to figure out what made sense to solve the problem. And I was like, I think I can do this with context and something else. And Mike was thinking of doing it another way. So we split and kind of worked separately. And I think Mike got closer to, or we thought that we had solved it.
We thought we did.
Like I typed in apples and it's like, that's already on your list. I'm like, oh, it actually isn't. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. So you made progress, it sounds like. Okay, but that sounds like there's still a bit more to do for that one too.
Yeah, it's just figuring out how to like take a snapshot of the user's database, like items, and then compare it to like what the value is that we inputted, the user's input. So I think it's just like trying to figure out how to do that. Like we created a constant where it grabs the collection, says how does that collection look like, and how do we like find that specific token. So
yeah, right. Okay, cool. All right, so that's good to know. Let's come back to kind of the specifics of the project after we do the retro. Lars is going to run us through a retro. So we'll talk about, kind of we'll do the typical retro appreciations, what went well and what we could have done better. And then let's kind of make a plan towards after that, after we've kind of talked through it. And then Lars also has he's prepared a little bit of a kind of a mini learning module for us about decomposition. So we'll kind of talk that through as well. So I'll hand it over to Lars.
Okay. So let me share the link to the project here in Zoom. Let's see. So do we pull that up individually then and add items, and I'll share my screen while we add them? Is that a good?
Yeah, that works. Yep.
Good approach.
Yeah, and then when everyone's done with theirs, they can just put done in the chat, and we'll know that we're ready to talk.
If you want to wait to share your screen till after you do yours, Lars, that might, I don't know, put pressure on you.
That just
that's
just
actually a good
occurred to
point.
me. Yeah. So let's all spend a few minutes then on that project, adding one card each in each column, and then put a bullet point. So your name at the top, and then a bullet point list of if you have more than one items there, just to make it a little easier to shuffle those later. And Andrew, it sounded like you had a randomizer somewhere that maybe you'll pull the random order.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. Yep.
Great. So let's reconvene in a couple of minutes then. And Monica, if you're having issues, it's fine if we don't if they don't appear on the board. We can. Sorry, my mic was far away. Monica, if you're having issues adding your thoughts here, it's fine if you just want to speak them when we get to you as well. So don't worry about it.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm sorry. I'm in the car. I can't get to the other cards. I can only get to the ones on my phone, not on my computer. So yeah, I'll give my thoughts. When
it's your turn, Monica, we can try, but it sounds like the connection it's a little iffy there. So if we can make that work, totally fine if you just want to add your thoughts when you get home as well, instead of us trying to fight the connection there.
I appreciate it. Is it like breaking up, or I can't tell?
You were breaking up a little bit. Right now you were good. So let's, when we get to it in a couple of minutes, let's see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out, we'll just skip you when we go through the review here.
Okay, we'll do. Thanks.
I think almost everyone's done here. We're still waiting for Stacy, possibly.
I didn't pull any cards.
Okay. Yep.
Oh. Sorry.
That's okay. Does that mean we are done? I'm having trouble counting here, but okay. Unless anyone says they're still working, let's get started. Let me share my screen here. So we're starting with Mike. So why don't you kick it off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate the follow through that all the mentors had. I think they're saying let us know if you need any help, or how's everything going. And I mean, to extend to that, I felt like I should have been a little bit more vocal. I'm yeah, things are going good. And then I started asking questions. So I really appreciate just the over communication of that. Another part is, Nikema for being very flexible with her time. I know this past week for both of us, it's been kind of very busy in our personal lives and work. So being able to hey, can you jump on a call 20 minutes from now? I'm yeah, sure. So thanks for that. And all our side conversations that we've had, that's kind of tech related, but life related too. That was great to converse with Nikema about.
Cool. Yeah, so I really do appreciate everyone's effort on the cards this week. I know, life happens, people get busy, and it's kind of hard to, I don't know, we're juggling a bunch of other priorities at the same time as working on this. So I just really appreciate everyone kind of hanging in there and putting an effort on what you're working on. Lars, thank you for your just kind of thoughtful way that you connect with and encourage all the team, and giving great technical feedback. I'm learning from it myself, so that's great. And Stacy, as always, your input on both on technical issues and just kind of encouraging the team. It's just, it's really helpful. Thank you so much. And now is when Monica could jump in with hers.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. So definitely wanted to say that I appreciate Lars and Stacy. I just wanted to shout you guys out just for being willing to jump in and help me get started on the story just on such short notice. So I really, really appreciate that. I don't think I mentioned it, but me and Lars paired first. I feel like we got a lot of progress made. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate you guys for that, and just appreciate everybody for, like Mike said, just being willing to help out and just being vocal and, just always being there when we need help. I'm gonna mute myself again. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Yeah.
No worries. Okay, and then Amber, you're next.
Yeah, so my appreciations were just for everyone reaching out after my time management struggles this week. I got a little overwhelmed. I had 2 interviews relatively close and neither of them went very well. So not an excuse, obviously, but those are my first 2 in this field, and it was just kind of so
that's big.
Yeah, so sorry about that, but I do appreciate everybody reaching out and being compassionate in their reaching out, and along with Monica as well for being patient while we both kind of had life get in the way this week. So it was good to just have that patience when we met up and finally got to work.
Cool. My turn. I think Mike maybe mentioned it earlier too, but I thought there were some great discussions in Slack around what were the topics. I think did we have a testing discussion? But there were a couple others too. I just remember them being
TDD versus
that's what
BDD.
it was. Yep.
Yeah.
Some. I feel like we're getting the hardest questions here, where it's like it depends is always the answer, right? But some great discussions there, I thought. And then I thought it was fun to follow the interview experience in your updates, Nikima. You know, the interviews, whether they go well or not so well. Great learning experience for sure, and definitely. There's always something there that you can learn from, I think. So yeah, that's what I have. Nikima, next.
I just want to appreciate everyone for supporting me when I was going through my interview. I don't know. I don't know why it surprised me, but I just felt like really overwhelmed with positivity. So that was great.
Oh, good.
And just, I guess, everyone else's openness and being willing to learn and try new things, and also the mentors. I just feel really encouraged and supported, and I feel like everything is going to be okay. And I think that everyone here contributes to that safety feeling. So I appreciate it.
Did you have another card? It looks like you have 2 cards.
Oh, I put that other one in things that went well, but maybe.
Oh, okay. Let me drag it over.
Yeah, I'll move it over.
Yep.
There we go. The muting when I'm got my screen shared is not as easy here. So I think I got the unmuting working in there. Okay, so that's the first column, and then let's move to the second one. Mike, you're first here too.
Yeah. So again, reiterating the flexibility of this week, being able to jump on a call on a whim was really appreciative. And then we started pair programming together where Nikima would drive and I would help, and then vice versa. So that was a great learning experience. At the same time as the week started coming to a close, we were able to okay, I'm going to try this approach and you try this approach. If you have any issues, we can talk about it. And we were just really open. We didn't care whose code it was that was being used. It was more of are we supporting each other? Are we trying to finish the task and being able to communicate about that. And again, just being everyone being so supportive, and when we were having issues, etc.
Cool.
Yeah, not owning code, I think it's a good indicator of a healthy dev team. It's really bad if code belongs to a certain person and nobody else is allowed to touch it. That's a smell in my book, at least.
Oh yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, I just I feel like I saw some really good questions coming from the pairs and towards the end of the week, but it was just really good. Here's what I'm trying, and it's I'm getting this result, and do people have ideas? Those kinds of questions I think are super. That's exactly what we want to be seeing from people. So keep doing more of that. Love it.
And then Amber.
So I just said that everybody was being supportive and holding everyone accountable, similar to what Nikima said. It's just a really healthy environment for collaboration. And it's kind of sad that during this week, it kind of really hit me that I have a lot of well, not a lot of, it sounds a little melodramatic, but I've just become accustomed to unhealthy work environments that, similar to Nikima, when you get hit with a healthy one, you're like, oh, this is nice. Unexpected, but nice. So that was pretty much what I really appreciated and what I think we did well this week.
Yeah, I think so. This retro was supposed to cover 2 weeks, I think.
Oh, that's true.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
My memory is like 1 week is enough, but I actually looked up earlier what happened the previous week, and it reminded me of the merge conflicts that happened at the tail end last week on Saturday, I think, and I want to call out the collaboration there was really good. And then this week, I liked what I saw, with some early draft PRs and branches early in the week before it got a little quiet. But it was off to a very good start. I'm hoping we can repeat that in next week's work.
Oh, should we give Monica a chance to speak? I think she didn't have a card in this column.
Yeah, that's what So Monica, we were discussing things that went well. I don't know if you had we didn't see a card from you, but I don't know if you had anything you want to call out there.
I did. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, the call dropped for a minute, so I just wanted to say real quick as far as what went well. Definitely, I feel like just the responsiveness of the mentors, that everybody just being willing to jump in and answer questions and everything like that, and just being willing to help out and pair on the spot. And I think too, just definitely with the pair session that Amber and I had, just her diligence and patience and just like working out the kinks and trying to make sure that we had that functionality there. So we still have some things that we do have to work on with the ACs, but I think that she did a great job with just, unraveling what we could.
Cool. And then Nikima.
I guess on my card I have that this week we got off to a good start. I felt like we kind of knocked out those first things right away. So I think that went well. But over the past 2 weeks, speaking for myself, and I think it's safe to say for everyone, I'm learning a lot, and I'm able to see how to apply that learning. And even just with last week when we had the pair programming lesson, we implemented that this week when I paired with Mike. So I think just learning and applying the learning is going well.
Cool. Okay, then last column on things we could improve. So Mike, why don't you get us started there?
I feel that time management, it was kind of a challenging part, at least this week and last week for me, just because with my work and stuff, it eats up a lot of time, and being accountable to have time for this work. I mean, I did do the 5 hours, but felt like some of these issues took longer. So understanding how to break those into little smaller pieces so that won't get burnt out. And that's what happened to me before I joined this cohort. Was I burned out because I just kept on coding, not giving myself time for breaks, etc. And the second part is asking questions early. I know I said this 2 weeks ago. I think to follow through with that, it's not just asking questions early. It's how do you ask questions when you don't have any code in front of you? I think I know that I know what is the task at SAMS. The task is at hand, but then that leads to assumptions. And how do I know if it's assumption or something that I really concretely know? So being able to be vocally about that and really asking those, even though you don't have code in front of you.
And Andrew, you're next.
Yeah. Each week is new challenges, and it's I don't know, some stories are harder than others and all that kind of stuff, more complex. And I don't know if I'm kind of hearing a mix maybe of life got in the way and maybe a little bit of underestimation maybe of the tasks. So whatever the reason, we should maybe spend a little bit of time talking through sort of just how do we kind of get in front of this stuff a little bit better in the future. So a couple of questions that we can answer later, we don't have to answer right now, is would it help to kind of very early in the week share your high level approach to what you're trying to do? Does this, and then just get feedback on it, either in Slack, or I guess we could do that in draft PRs too. I feel like Slack might be a little easier to tag in the mentors on Slack, whereas the pair is working in the draft PR. But and the other thing is just knowing that, to kind of stay on schedule, so you have time to respond to feedback and incorporate changes. Really the PRs should probably be submitted end of day Thursday. Like when do you think you should kind of get that first pairing session in and try to get some code in there in order to hit that date? So we can, like I said, we can talk about that later. But really, like I think like this week is a good example where the PRs came in, either yesterday or kind of late yesterday, and there was some significant feedback, so we didn't have time to address it in time for to kind of get it merged in time for this meeting. So just like thinking, kind of walking back from this meeting to all the things that need to happen to kind of get it merged. This is like Caitlin Greffley from the first cohort. She's given a presentation a couple times about the difference between a coding boot camp and a real, like her first kind of real job. And in a coding boot camp, like you're writing code all the time, and like you're committing to master, and like you're seeing all these changes really fast. And in her first job, it's like you write a line of code, you read about 200 lines of code, it breaks something, you have to go research stuff. Like it's just the pace of it is much slower because you're working in a more complex space when you're working on a team. So I think we just maybe need to be getting a little bit earlier start on actually getting kind of your intention committed to the PRs so that we can get early feedback. But yeah, like anyway, we can talk about, kind of make a plan for how we do that in the future in the discussion after this.
And then Amber, you're next.
Sorry. Mine was also trying to like just asking more questions more often, and it didn't make sense until Mike articulated, but it is very much like, how do you ask those initial questions that help you with the higher level, like laying out of the problem and how you process it? Like, because like you guys did a really good job of checking in, but at the point, like, I definitely have questions, but I don't know how to, when you don't have, which is, I assume a skill that you just learn over time, yada, yada, but just a thing that we could improve upon. And I also had just written, for my personal experience, it'd be like writing testing suites, like just like really rudimentary ones, because like I didn't realize that whatever way I was storing things in local storage wasn't persistent to all screens of the app, and like probably like a simple integration test would have let me know that, as opposed to me thinking I was doing that all along, and what I was doing was console logging the wrong variable, yada yada yada. So maybe having that integrated later on may help other people if they hit like a similar snag.
Yeah, and tests, I totally agree with you. Having a suite of regression tests to make sure that you don't break existing functionality when you add new functionality would be very helpful. And it has been discussed, like incorporating tests into the project. And I know the previous cohort tried, but it comes with a learning curve and complexity, etc. So what I heard is that it kind of got in the way of other things a little bit. So, but I totally like that. This is why tests have an important place in software development, because it is, it's so hard to know for sure if you broke something else when you make a change if you don't have that safety net in place. And then Monica.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Monica.
Yeah. On things that we could improve.
Again, as I mentioned on one of the calls, I can't really speak for the team as a whole. I can only speak for myself and what I know for sure I need to work on. And I feel like Andrew, Amber, and Mike kind of touched on the 3 things I need to be working on, which is just trying to avoid that burnout and definitely getting my time management together. I've got a lot on my plate, but I also know that this is my priority and that I'm working on this. So I need to get better at getting started earlier and setting aside the time that I need to start researching and figuring out how I want to approach the problems. I feel as though I held on to like my ideas and my questions for too long this week. Instead of kind of bouncing ideas off of everyone, I kind of waited until the last minute and I wasn't sure which direction to go in. So that's something I have to work on. Just making sure that I ask the right questions.
And for me, it's sort of along the same theme that we've already discussed. But so communicating any issues that you may have, or your availability as early as possible, just makes it so much easier to plan around for everyone else. Well, I've heard that from many managers. Like it's okay if things take longer or whatever happens, but surprises are sort of the worst thing. So, you don't surprise the manager last minute. Like that is no fun. So just as early as possible, surface any issues or any things you may encounter. So, and then the second one I have, we already discussed, I think. So just last minute PRs means everyone scrambling, and especially without tests in place, then the chance of breaking something or doing something unintended is just very high. So that's what
as a manager I can confirm exactly what Lars is saying. Like, I don't care if it's going to take twice as long. I just want to know up front so I can manage, like stakeholder expectations, all those kinds of things. So yeah, that early communication is key.
And Nikima, you're last here.
Yeah, like everyone else said, the time management. Personally, I think part of my problem with time management was that I needed time to learn things that needed to be applied to the problem. So, and I didn't really account for that. Like, I'm not super familiar with Firebase, and I feel like the biggest problem is that I have an idea of what I want to do, but I don't know how to do it with this tool. And it's the same thing with React. Like, I've had some exposure to React, but not a whole lot. So I think factoring in and like blocking out time to like sit down and really understand what I'm doing instead of like scrambling to, Stack Overflow, Google, whatever, and then trying to like fit these pieces together when you don't really have an idea of what the whole picture is. So, and also just, I think more questions that can accept feedback earlier and more often.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and how did you want me to get through sort of the little thing I've prepared, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, let's do that, and then let's kind of make a plan for the coming week.
Yep.
Because we have some outstanding work that we probably want to like wrap up before we move on to the next set of cards. So, yeah, Lars, why don't you give your presentation first?
And just heads up that this is something I thought of earlier today, and I haven't really. There are no slides or anything. I just sort of from working with both teams this week, and also hearing some of the feedback here, and there are things we could improve. I sort of saw some common themes here, and maybe in the previous weeks too, around maybe not breaking things down as much as you could, or structure the work iteratively, etc. So I had this idea, and let's see how successful it is. But just sort of, so I'll pull up each of the issues that you guys were working on, and kind of talk you through what my process would have been if I were to implement them, and sort of, we'll touch on some of the, breaking things down. I'm not a Firebase expert either, so I'll include things like, here's something I have to research, or here's a clarification, etc. So, also want to preface this with, like, this is not the approach of doing it. This is not the only way of doing it, but it is what my approach would have been. So hopefully there are bits and pieces here that are useful for everyone. So let me pull up the first here with duplicates. Let's see here. So that's the one that Mike and Nikima worked on this week. So I didn't actually try to implement this one myself. So there's a chance here I'm making an assumption, or that it is actually more complicated when you start working on it. But I sort of want to walk you through my thought process, just seeing the acceptance criteria here, and how I would approach it. So sort of, high level here, I'd be thinking, what's the point of this story, right? It's kind of obvious from the text, I guess. We want to avoid duplicates. We want to avoid having a list that has, paper towels and then paper towel slightly, but that's a bad example, but slightly misspelled or varieties of the same item added to the list, right? Just noisy. So it's more of a user experience kind of thing. So that's sort of the context of it. A good starting point then would probably be to pull up a list and see, I may have to delete this blank token here now. Add an item. I add apples. And let's add it again. Got a couple apples. Got a couple of blank entries here too, but maybe there's a later story for that. But okay, so I can confirm that in the current state of things, you can add multiple apples. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the intent and the context here of the story. So then looking through each of the acceptance criteria here, we've got a first one here around, show an error message if I try to submit an item that's exactly the same name. So that makes sense. That's what I did now. I typed in apples twice. Should get an error here. Makes sense. And then there seems to be a slight variation, or making it that slightly more resilient, I guess, where if you submit a new item that has the same name, and then even if the capitalization is slightly different or some punctuation, so even if you capitalize apples or you have some sort of punctuation there, they should still be treated identical. Okay, sort of a variation of the first, and then the third one here. The user's original input should be what gets saved to the database. A little unclear, maybe. I saw there were some questions around that. I'm sort of thinking the intent here is that, if you try to change the input here to compare, it should be that original input that should be added. So if I were to add, say, apples here now, and I click add item, I want apples with a capital A to be added, not lowercase, if that's what we do to compare. A little unclear, so that I'd probably make a note of that. I want to ask a clarifying question there. Another thing that comes to mind is sort of the specifics here of comparing these. It's like, okay, that seems like something we'll have to solve, but seems like maybe something that people have solved before as well. So I would probably make a note of that. It seems like maybe we don't have to finalize all the details right away, but I'm aware of something called regular expressions. That's sort of where my mind goes right away, which is sort of has to do with comparing text and stripping out characters you're not interested in, etc. But that aside, just sort of make a note of that. That seems like something we could deal with in a later phase. So to start with, then, clarifying the third bullet point here seems important. Just so I understand there are no other surprises in the issue here.
So Lars,
yep.
I'm the product owner. So what kind of questions would you ask to clarify that?
Yeah, I mean, plain and simple, like what I ask now. Maybe a screenshot here of. I already have apples. I'm trying to add this. I'd send you a screenshot. Or do you want apples with capital A? Or do you want the input to stored in my list like that? Or do you want this to be sort of simplified to that? Mm-hmm. And then that's probably what maybe I completely misunderstood something here. So I would definitely want to ask early on to make sure I don't proceed down a path of implementing something that's super complex. I'd also ask you the punctuation, the specifics around this. What do you mean by punctuation? That sounds vague. To me, that seems like a detail. Maybe that can be dealt with in a couple of days. Doesn't seem like this is harder or easier, regardless of whether semicolons is considered punctuation. That's sort of where my mind goes. Right. And if I can do 3 different characters, I can probably do 5. Like that's.
So the answer to the last AC is that to the user, capitalization and punctuation might be important, but they also in a rush may forget to do those things. So we want to make sure there's not duplicates in that case. But if they take the time to capitalize something and add punctuation, we'd want to save that in the database and display it back to them that way, right? But we would there's a normalized form for these inputs that we would compare to see if it's a duplicate.
Real quick, in addition to how Andrew was like, what kind of questions would you ask? Well, Amber was saying that it's really hard to come up with the words because it totally freaking is. So if you find that you're having trouble putting these questions into words, a video or like a live pairing can be really helpful. So if you haven't used a tool called Loom before, Loom, it's really great and lets you have like a little video of yourself where you can like talk it out, and you can also record your screen. So you can be like, I'm looking at this, because when you're typing and you type words like this and thing, you're like, that's not descriptive. But if you're pointing at something, it is. So utilize video if you need to.
Yeah, it's a way to make these clarifications asynchronous, right? Where we may not have time to get on a call, but if you send a video, I watch the video. Okay, I know what you're asking, and then I can respond either with a video or text or something, right? Yep.
And so at this point, I have a pretty good sense of like this is what I have to do, right? There's some details and some nuance maybe around punctuation. I feel like that can be sorted out secondary. But so I want to start trying to plan this. How do I break it down? I would probably just totally ignore this complicating bullet point first, and I would be, I'm just going to focus on the first one. All I'm going to do when you add an item is to make sure or check for an identical match. I'm going to just all the complexity around punctuation and figure out exactly which characters we're going to deal with. I'm going to wait with that because I think the feeling of getting something in place here that works with identical comparison, like that means we could probably even launch with that, and then week 2 would make the second more advanced version public. And just having something that's working, make a commit, like this is a great stopping point. Maybe that's the first session, and feel good about getting something in place. So I would just do that, and I would just make the assumption, it may not be right, but I would make the assumption that any sort of implementation here, this here would be sort of an extension of that. It doesn't mean that it's the case. You can imagine a solution where you do this comparison directly in the database, and with that second part, you can't actually do that in the database. Like you may need to have JavaScript code to do that comparison. So I'm not saying it's necessarily true, but I would almost say like just getting this in place and implemented, even if you have to make some changes, that may be a better sort of point to get to rather than just trying to get all of the complexity in place right away. It's worth thinking through before you start implementing. Like it could, so how are we going to do it? And maybe there's an important discussion to have there. Maybe if you start the week with a pairing session, brainstorming that is not a bad idea. But if it were me, like the first thing I would start implementing here would be just to do the duplicate check with identical strings. Yeah, and another thing that I think you brought up, Amber, was sort of well, how do you do that? Like I haven't used Firebase before, but neither have I. So I would, dig up the documentation, and there's a lot here. So part of it would be to find the right section, and I know they have, something on simple and compound queries here. I don't know what compound queries are, but simple sounds good. So I'd probably start here with, I have to do some sort of like find items where the token matches and the exact name of the item matches. So seems like building on something like this, maybe do a little spike and try that out first. Am I able to pull up existing items matching a certain name? Something like that could be a good first attempt. But yeah, there's
Lars.
Yep.
So something else, something else that could be a valid question to the product owner is, would it be sufficient? It's possible that there could be 2 people using the same list, and in the time that where you, since you launched the app to when you're you're adding a new item, the other person who's using the same list could have added that item, right? That's a case, but it might be an edge case. And would it be possible to just compare against the list you already have in memory instead of going to the database for it?
Yep. Are there simpler solutions here? Is it good enough? That's always something to keep in mind.
Yeah. So with existing data that you already have in the app, could you solve this problem without having to make another network call? It's kind of a, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a good question to ask almost in every case. I don't know.
Yep. Then sort of in parallel here, like we want this functionality at some point, presumably. I mean, maybe not if this took 1,000 times more effort than just doing the first one. This means we can only launch in 2 years. That's not obviously not the case here, right? But sometimes that is the case where the product owner thinks most things are equally hard, and that's just not the case in practice. Anyway, in this case, you need to find a way to normalize or to strip out the characters you don't care about. So that is maybe a good item to tackle individually. So maybe you meet initially and look at this, try and break it down. Maybe if one of you has some time until the next time you meet, that could be a nice one to try on your own. It's also a very good fit for unit tests. We're not doing testing here, but this sort of making sure that two strings are considered equal based on some rule set. Like, it's a very good fit for unit tests. We're not doing testing here, but just a sort of a heads up, like that. If I were to implement that in my day job, there would be a lot of tests here, and it would be very easy to create test cases for it. Yeah. Any questions on this one before I get to the second issue?
I'm interested, Mike and Nikema, how does that compare to the way that you all, like, your first conversations about this?
It's actually pretty close. I think what Lars just said about, I guess, kind of judging like how doing one task at a time, and like how complex it turns out one task turns out to be. I hadn't really thought about that. I don't think I ever looked at it like doing one thing at a time. I think I always looked at it as the whole thing. And it's kind of helpful to think about it that way, as what's the most important thing to get done first and to get working first.
I love the feeling of getting something end-to-end working, and I have something here. It's not perfect, but it's something I can build on, rather than having like half of like unfinished something that's super fancy when it's done, but it's not really working yet. So I just love that sort of completing it end-to-end, and I know I can do this now. It's just a matter of expanding from there. Stacey, did you have a comment too?
Yeah, I am just keeping an eye on time. I think before we go into this second issue, Can we talk about what our approach to next week is? And then if folks want to stick around and see how number 2 would go, that would be great.
Yeah, we're already at like 10 minutes over time. So that's probably a good idea. Yeah, what, Lars, do you have thoughts about sort of what we can do next week?
Yeah, so took a quick look earlier at the next two issues that are lined up. I think one of them is slightly more complex than the other. So I think 9 is a little more complex, 8 is a little simpler. So I think it probably makes sense to spend a part of the week wrapping up the 2 issues that are in progress. I don't think there's that much left, but there's some work left, and getting that to a place where we're not breaking existing functionality, etc. I think it's worth spending a couple of days on that, and then maybe having as a stretch goal of getting 8 implemented here. Whether that is whichever peer finishes their task first, they get started on that. That maybe makes sense. Thoughts on that?
Thoughts from the teams, the pairs?
I think that makes sense to do it that way, because like you mentioned, we both kind of have tasks that we still have to work through.
So would we stick with the current pairs for another few days and then kind of switch it up midweek, or would we like through the whole week, or like what would you want to, how do you want to work that?
I think that we should set like a deadline, like have these issues wrapped by Tuesday, Wednesday, and merged, and then do an official switch on that day, or like try and find a way to work as 4 on issue number 8, maybe.
Yeah, that's good.
Everybody
good
work
thought
on
too. And if, I guess if one pair didn't, well, I guess we'd need to switch at that point, right? We need to switch the pairs. So yeah, is everyone comfortable with that? Like, can we hit Tuesday as a kind of, we have everything merged date for the current issues in flight? I'm seeing nodding.
Seems feasible.
Okay. And then
I haven't
Wednesday,
yeah, I haven't been following along at all with like the actual code, just the conversations here and there. But it does sound like there might be some need to like lift state, which is something that a lot of the cohorts have been dealing with. So when you're dealing with React, you want to make sure like most of the issues we're facing with like tokens missing and lists going away, or like needing to look at that list again, means that you need to take whatever data is living there and kind of bring it to a place where all of the components can access it. So just kind of try and keep that in mind as you move forward on the app.
That could even be something where, go ahead, Nikima.
That was the approach I took. I know you said you didn't look at the code, but that's what I did. I used context hook and created a context for the list and a way to call that list if the list isn't in state already. But yeah, I got stuck.
I think that's a really good approach if you can manage it.
Yeah, ideally we would sort of, when the app first launches, we check for a token. If we have a token, we grab the list, and then we have the list in memory, and we can like pass it into components that need it. But otherwise, we're just kind of operating on the list in memory. And from the product owner perspective, I'm okay with that. Like at this point, it's an edge case that there would be 2 people kind of interacting with the list at the same time. So let's consider, like, if you have the list in memory at some high level provider kind of level, you can pass that into components and work just with that. Not have to make a bunch of calls to the database to always be checking to make sure the database is up to date with what's there. It'll be kept up to date kind of in real time by Firestore kind of by default anyway. So I would just like pass the list into other components and like do your like filtering or checking for duplicates, all that kind of stuff on the list in memory.
Yeah, your intuition with context is on point here, Nikima.
Yep, for sure.
So maybe the coming week then, one team gets to item 8 here, and then the other pair can maybe look at some cleanup around state there. And if you had some ideas there, Nikima, that may be a good item to tackle, if that will save us time in the future weeks.
Does that sound like, if it was just one pair working on issue 8, do you feel comfortable tackling that in a shortened week? Kind of Wednesday through Sunday?
This is why I think it could be good to have just all 4 kind of like meet, and it could be a lot of async work, but that way like everybody's still keeping their hands on this code and understanding what it does, because I'm afraid if just one pair is doing it, the other pair is going to kind of like lose touch with what's happening in the app.
I think the idea was that one pair would work on issue 8 and the other pair would kind of make sure that we're lifting state and doing those kinds of things.
Yeah, if state's not already lifted by the time these merge, then yes, I fully agree with that.
Okay.
And just real quick too, with the token disappearance thing, same kind of thing, like lifting state, like that checking for the token and storing tokens and stuff should all be done at like the highest level of the app, basically. So that's probably why it's missing, is because it's like buried somewhere. And when you leave that component, it's like, oh, I don't know about a token anymore. What's that? So if you like take that and bring it up, then it's like the whole app knows about tokens.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
I was wondering though if that bug was about like maybe a variable getting set to an empty string or something, and local storage getting set again or something.
I can't imagine local storage just dropping something just because it's moved away from component. So I think you're right. But either way, if you set it like up higher like that, I feel like you'll be able to better see what's happening.
Yeah, I agree. Cool.
Okay.
Anyway, we're totally here for you if you get stuck and if you have other questions. We'll be like doing a lot of traveling, but we're here for you.
Yep.
And if people have a few minutes to stick around, I'm obviously not going to do that if everyone have to leave, but if not, I'll walk through the second issue as well.
Even if everybody has to drop, I think it's still worth doing. We're recording it, and it'll be there for future folks.
It's going to be
but
super
if you do
awkward,
need to drop,
though, just sitting on my own here, meeting.
I'll sit here with you.
I'll sit here with you, Lars.
So this is anyway. So if you have to drop, it's totally fine. And if not, follow along. So this issue, pulling this up as a user, I want to join an existing shopping list so I can share a shopping list with someone. That makes sense. That sounds like a nice feature. Maybe it's like within a family, you want to share a list, something like that. Makes total sense. So looking through the description here, I see some descriptions about how this is done. So there's you enter a token, show an error if it doesn't exist. Allow the user to try again or start a new list. Then this should be stored to local storage and show the user the existing list. Kind of weird to me that this is like, is it an acceptance criteria? Is it not? So it seems like more of a hint maybe around the implementation. So definitely some important details there. And then looking through the acceptance criteria, I see on the onboarding screen, I can tap something, a link or button, I assume, to reveal a field where you can enter a token. So in my head, I'm imagining some sort of text box where you enter a token. And then if you enter it and clicking submit, that's stored to local storage and giving me joint control of the list. So, where I would start in that case would be to sort of make sure I really understand how this token and local storage, like how this works compared to, I refresh and that's gone. I get a new list, make sure I understand how that works with the items in the database. Of course, that's going to be slow. Anyway, to be able to the items I see in my list, I'm able to pull that up in the database. If I filter down by, anyway, you guys know what it looks like, but if I filter down by token, do I see the same thing? Having that full end-to-end understanding, I think would be very important for this issue. If you don't have that, I think that the whole, joining a list sounds very complicated. And in reality here, it's really not that complicated. I would probably also add an item, try do this. So I get a lot of interesting tokens here in general, Andrew. So I would try and do this manually. So I would actually open a second browser. I haven't prepared this, but pull up the list here in a different browser and add that token to local storage manually. It's going to take too long here, but just sort of joining the list that way, to make sure I fully understand what's going on here. And Monica and I did that the other day, and that works perfectly. And it's a very good sort of, I understand what it means to join an existing list. So that's sort of where I would start. Then let's see if there's any. I'm also thinking this kind of tap to reveal a field sounds like fancy UI. That sounds like polished to me. I would start right away here with just show the field. Show a text box, a button, and that would be my first attempt here. Just make sure I can show that button, you enter a token, and you add it. The same goes for this, if it doesn't exist or not. I'm going to assume the token exists, and I'm going to add it to local storage. So create a text box, click the button, it add it to local storage and send the user to the list. That would be my first task. Then I would start sort of iterating on this tap to reveal a field. Maybe that's a task someone can do on their own. And the same with this checking if the token exists in the database already. Sounds like maybe I have to pull up this documentation again to do some sort of query. Maybe you can do it in memory. There are probably multiple ways of doing it. Also something I would do in a secondary or tertiary phase here. At least for me, like the whole revealing stuff, that sounds complicated. I don't know how to create buttons and links.
Because you're a back-end engineer, that's why.
Yeah. So I would start simple. And another thing I would do here is that, in my app, well, where else do I have this kind of text box? Well, we have that on this page already. So I would start going here and copying over that code and stripping out the things that it's not relevant. It's radio buttons and this text here, maybe change it out with something else, but that would be my starting point too. Let's see. Yeah, and this like the redirect to existing list. Yeah, maybe it's a nice to have too. Maybe at first you just add it to local storage and user has to click the button to list and then figure out this is probably some React router stuff I'd have to look up to. Maybe we do that on a different page. I actually don't think we do that yet, but that's probably a Google's or Stack Overflow kind of item as a secondary phase as well. So that's where my head goes. Like here, the first step would be just assume everything's working, that the user gives you good input and get that working end to end. Same again, commit, feel good about it. If you have more time, try and working on the individual sort of polish on top of that. But at least then you have functionality that works that you can launch with, and then you can layer in, there are things like feature flags that, where you can turn things, configure things off and on in your production system. Very often you can launch something hidden behind this kind of flag, meaning you can maybe turn it off for internal users, verify that functionality works, even if you don't launch it to everyone. And then, you have something in production, then you can layer in more and more until you got enough to launch. So that's sort of where my mind goes in all of this, like break it down into the smallest piece that I can check in, push to GitHub and share with my partner here. So how close or far away was that from you, Amber, and Monica's approach?
Very far. Pretty much whenever I look at these, I kind of just look at and pick whatever like I can think of an immediate approach, not immediate, but like I can visualize the approach for, and I'm like, all right, I guess that's what I'm doing, because that's what makes sense to me currently. But trying to do a general lay of the land would definitely be a better approach, because right now it's me just like looking at those bullet points, picking like the most feasible bullet point just from like my knowledge of things. And then just like, oh, when I hit a roadblock, but it's me trying to like get to work as soon as possible, which may or may not be a good thing mentality wise.
How about you, Monica?
That may be hard to.
Yeah.
You're on mute, but I don't know if you tried to respond, Monica. Yeah, for me personally, at least, if like starting to work on a task where I don't really understand the context, like I would try and clarify for sure. Or if it sounds very complicated, maybe there's something else I'm missing here. I'm not talking about this specifically, but if I get a ticket and I'm not fully clear on why I'm doing something, I definitely ask the product owner for clarification, or did I understand this correctly? Like, whatever's unclear here.
This was like, I haven't been paying attention to your wikis, so maybe you're already doing this, but this was the intention of the wikis at first, was like, take what's in this story and paste it into your wiki. And then in each of those bullets, you can kind of do a big block of just thoughts that you're having, ways you think you could approach it, questions you might have. Because the more notes you take and the more you really like think about and write out the issue that you're tackling, the more holes you'll start to see, the more direction you'll start to get on what you think is possible. And even if you don't know the technicalities of how exactly am I going to query Firebase for this thing, or how could I add a button? You just know it. Like first, I need a list. I need a button. Okay, now take one step back from that final list or final button. What do I need, like, the details behind that to be, and kind of work your way backwards until you have this solid plan that you can kind of, like, as you've thought through the nitty-gritty details of how you might do that, you've gone into Stack Overflow to see, like, oh, what's possible. Now you have this huge list of resources that you've learned from. And before you write any code, you can kind of start building some pseudocode about how you think this thing should be built. And then before you know it, it's all just kind of falling into place without you ever having to, like, you'd be like grueling over code, you know, like, oh, the syntax isn't right. It's like you've got your big ideas kind of documented. And then it's a lot easier at that point too to be like, I think this is how this thing should be built. What kind of feedback do you have on this, or whatever ideas you have? You kind of like answer a lot of your own questions when you're kind of rubber ducking with yourself with these notes.
Yeah, the wiki, I mean, everybody's style is different, but I think the wiki can be used for, you know, I know this part. I totally visualize how this part was going to work. I don't have any idea how to do this part. This part I could maybe, you know, I feel like I could dig a little bit and figure it out. Like, kind of even just documenting that process of documenting it makes it pretty obvious, like, where you need to be asking questions in the channel, right? So, you know, whether it's a wiki or a draft PR or however you want to do it, like, somehow, like, kind of the act of writing it out, I think helps clarify and just keep your thoughts organized and things.
Yeah, I hope it was sort of on the fly a little bit, but I hope it was still useful to sort of see one type of thought process. Hopefully that, you know, you can use parts of that at least in a future issue. Don't copy everything I said, because that's what works for me, and there, you know, I probably left things out as well. And, you know, if anyone else here was to give you the same kind of walkthrough, there are probably a lot of differences. I'm sure both Andrew and Stacey thought of, well, I wouldn't do exactly that. So there are individual thoughts here and sort of approaches that I've found that works for me most of the time. And, you know, it depends on how much, you know, somebody who's really good at React may see the acceptance criteria and just visualize how all of these components are going to, like, this means that I'm going to have to, like, I'm not at that level. So I would just start putting some buttons here and there, and then realize this probably belongs in a separate component, and move files around. And it's sort of a messy iterative process. And the better you know it, the sort of closer you can be initially to the final result. But just getting, you know, especially if you don't know it that well, start with something simple. Just get something on the screen, like no compilation errors. That's great. It's like, get a text box showing, get something that can be input, and maybe you just output it to console log first and just sort of build it up from there. I just hate having tons of compilation errors and not knowing how far I am from something that works. So that's sort of my approach, is to do it like end to end works, but it's not that great, and then make it better.
And this is like a React project, and React can get wildly complex, obviously, as everything can. So, like, when you think about it too, if you're not quite sure how to do it like the React way, remember that this is just JavaScript too. So if you can think of a way to do it with JavaScript, so maybe you're not using context hook to, like, basically reproduce Redux, you're instead, like, have a file where you're storing a variable with the list in it and importing that, you know, like something really basic. That might be a little clunkier, but still does the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's just JavaScript.
But JavaScript could be hard too.
JavaScript's very hard. But, like, I feel like people get overwhelmed with, like, React is like...
They have to do it the perfect way. And
yeah, totally. So it's like, there's so much, there's tons of documentation on React, obviously, but there's even more on JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
So... still here for you because everything's complex.
I just wanted to express my frustration because I feel like we had all of the pieces working, but none of them would glue together. Like, when it came down to getting them all to work together, that was the hard part. Mm-hmm. And I just feel really limited by what I don't know. But it's like I know just enough to know a little bit of what I should know, and that's really frustrating.
Yeah,
it's like,
sure, yeah.
No, I want this. I don't want to do anything until this value has populated. So, like, how do I do that in JavaScript? And I think it's just I ran out of time, but I'm just frustrated. I just wanted to say I'm frustrated.
This is too like a good like reason why like asking even just those little bitty questions can like get you so much further than like just tinkering and tinkering and tinkering until you tinkered yourself like backwards and you're like, I'm behind where I was before. Also Twitter, like if you just ask like questions on Twitter, people love to tell you what they know. And you're like, free answers, these are all mine. Thank you.
I don't know why I never thought of Twitter.
Oh my God.
I'm on Twitter all the time.
Tweet there.
And that frustration of thinking you should know it, but you don't really know it, that doesn't go away. It probably gets worse and worse, because if you're really good at doing something in one stack and one programming language and switching, it's very frustrating because you know there's a good, simple way of doing it. I just can't find it, and you know you're doing stuff in a stupid way. It's just part of learning. That's just how it is.
Yeah, it does mean that you're learning, though. That discomfort that you're feeling means you're growing and getting better at it. So, I think you actually were kind of like really onto like, now I know exactly what the problem is. Like I have this kind of thing where it's like I have this race condition or whatever. It just, we kind of got to the end of the week before you kind of had that realization. So hopefully, we'll get these kind of wrapped up, and then maybe have a little time to go back and clean that up and really thoroughly understand like, okay, this is the right way to handle those async operations. But that's all good. I mean, I think, 4 weeks from now, when you're done with this whole thing, you're going to look back and be like, oh my God, I learned a lot.
It's through the struggle that you learn the most.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice job, everybody. We're so far over time. I'm so sorry.
But thank you for sticking around.
That's probably mostly my fault. So yeah.
No way, Lars. It's amazing, and thank you.
Yeah, that was super
thanks
cool.
so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll like keep working on these. Maybe like schedule another pairing sesh with your partner. Ask loud questions in the channel. Be noisy. Links to things when you're asking about specific things, like if it's a specific line in your code or something that you can point to in GitHub, that's helpful. And when in doubt, use a Loom video if you feel like you can't communicate what you're trying to say through text.
Mm-hmm. Sounds
good.
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a good night.
See
you
Bye,
soon.
everyone.